Well, welcome to today's session. I'm going to try and focus on something that I think is not talked about enough, especially for men, modern men, in long term or committed relationships. And that is the question about how do you, the man, and this applies, quite frankly, to women as well. Again, a lot of the advice I provide can be inverted. And when inverted with subtle modifications, are equally applicable to the woman. In this case, I'm speaking for men. And the question is, how do you, the man, protect yourself, recognizing the fact that there is no benefit to you, the man, in modern times, in the modern West, the developed West, to be married. Now, I have said this in one of the prior sessions, and I explained and I elaborated on my reasons. In principle, or in summary, I made the claim, and it's not a claim that is not substantiated by evidence that is available to everyone and yourself. One of the claim, or the overarching claim, is that there is nothing within the framework of marriage that is now exclusively available to only those who are married, that those who are outside of marriage cannot have. You can get sex today without being married. You can actually become a father. You can have someone do you the honor of raising a child for you without getting married to them. And so all of the other benefits that traditionally came with being married are now available outside of marriage. The addition is that you do not have all of the constraints, all of the liabilities, all of the expenses of marriage. And so, for that reason and many more, I opined that there was no benefit to modern men in the developed West, particularly, but even beyond the developed West. There is no benefit to being married. Now, I do make an exception that if you want to have children and you want to have kids, that it's best to do that within the confines, within the institution of a marriage. But again, it's not a requirement. It's a recommendation, but it's not necessarily a requirement. And in that case, the benefit is to the child. Now, let me come back to the man. Marriage is simply a contract with the state. As a matter of fact, in the United Kingdom, when you get married, it's very similar to the process you go through to set up a business. It's with a contract with the state, Her Majesty's kingdom. When you dissolve the marriage, you go through a similar process that you would go through when you actually decide to close down a business. You have to write to the state and go through the procedure. Love and contracts are not necessarily meant to be mutually exclusive. You do not need a contract to love someone, and you do not need a contract to be in love with someone. In many ways, most men go through the ritual of getting married because it's never our dream. That's a lady's dream, to have a wedding and to be married. We generally go along with the process. But what we do not understand is the contract we're signing is no different from a business contract. If you've ever bought a house, one of the things you'd have to go through is the process of understanding the deeds, the legal documents that you had to study and sign. The building you bought needed to have insurance. It was one of the requirements because there was a concern that if something were to happen to the building, you wanted to ensure that you were protected. And in many cases, the creditor who provided part of the loan, they wanted to ensure that their funds, their loan advance, are insured or is insured. To protect yourself as a man, the concept of a prenup is something that you must keep in mind. As a matter of fact, I do not think that it's intelligent for you to consider marriage without a prenup. Secondly, today most men are not getting married, but we are going through a social change where we're having more cohabit processes, where people cohabit rather than be married. So you're living with someone, you're getting all the benefits as though you're married, but you haven't signed that legal document. In any case, the risks still apply even if you are not married. And therefore, today's recommendation is you have to, if you decide to move in with someone, if you decide to get married to someone, you have to ensure that whoever the person is, that they sign with you, they sign a prenup agreement for marriage. If you are not getting married, you must ensure that they sign a cohabitation agreement. You must ensure that if, for some reason, you choose not to get married, you choose not to sign the cohabitation agreement, you must then ensure that in regards to the decisions both of you make jointly with regards to acquiring assets, liabilities, accessories of significant value, that you have an agreement in place. You've heard me say before that men should not consider marriage before age 35. Between 18 and 35, your focus should be on yourself, your purpose, your goals, your dreams, being your best self, improving your human capital so that you can create financial capital and financial wealth. Let's assume that you will consider marriage in this scenario at 35. Now, the average length of marriage in the UK today, especially for those who are getting married today, is roughly 7 years. That's the average length of marriage before divorce or before separation. Now, what that means is if you're married at 35 and that marriage lasts for 7 years, that takes you to 42 years. Let's assume you've been working since you were 22. Or let's say you were working since you were 20. You graduated, but just before you graduated, you had been working part-time and saving and investing. You've had between 20 years and 42 years, which is 22 years, to compound your wealth. At the point where the marriage or the relationship dissolves, whoever you've been married to, whoever you've been cohabiting with, under the law, has a claim on whatever wealth you created before the union and whatever wealth you created beyond the union. As a matter of fact, today, the family courts are so liberal and are so anti-male. It's almost as though they have a personal vendetta against men. And therefore, the idea that you would leave the courts to become the final arbitrators in your affairs is just completely preposterous. Do not let a third party, whether that be a court, a judge, decide on what you should keep, having created so much wealth. And so what these two specific agreements do for you, the cohabitation agreement and the prenup agreement, it protects you, it preserves your wealth, it protects the wealth you created before the union, it also protects the wealth you create during the union and beyond. Now, in so many parts of the world today, especially in the liberal countries in the West, we have a scenario whereby at the end of a marriage, whatever lifestyle the woman has been accustomed to living, she demands that that lifestyle is maintained even after the marriage is dissolved or the union is broken. So one of the things you have to carefully think about is what goes into that agreement. There's so many things to cover: finances, wealth, each person's responsibilities, and you can even expand that to include anything that both of you feel are necessary. Particularly, you should also include what happens in the event of termination by either party. And this is where you have to be very, very specific, because it's not your responsibility to continue to maintain someone else's lifestyle beyond the union. If you guys break up, the lifestyle that she was living as a result of your support or both of your contributions should not be expected. That has to be written very carefully into the agreement. And this simply means that at the end of the union, you sum up all of what's your assets, and that's what you keep. Whatever she came into the relationship with, she keeps. Whatever both of you jointly acquired, there's an arrangement on how that is split. She gets what is duly hers and nothing more. You get what is duly yours and nothing less. What that affords you is the opportunity to then go into the commitment, go into the relationship, should you choose to, knowing that the union is not about money. Now, having said this, some people would say that signing up to a prenup agreement is not romantic, or it somehow suggests that there is an expectation of failure in the marriage. There should be an expectation of failure. When you start a business, we know that sometimes close to 8 or 9 out of 10 businesses will fail. One of the things you do not do is sign up to use all of your wealth as collateral. You keep some for yourself, you bring some into the business, but you go through the thought process of ensuring that you're protected, especially when that company or business arrangement is with other people. What you do not want is to lose everything you've acquired due to negligence by someone else. In a similar way, you want the prenup agreement signed or the cohabitation agreement signed before you consider marriage. Now, here is a test, a litmus test, which helps determine whether the person you are in a relationship with is for you. And that is, if you bring up the conversation about a prenup agreement or a cohabitation agreement or some form of partnership agreement, and your partner, your girlfriend, your potential or future wife-to-be is not happy to sign that agreement, that is an indication that you should walk away from that relationship very, very fast. I wouldn't negotiate. I wouldn't try to convince. I wouldn't explain. Beyond the basics, I would simply walk away. Now, there's a difference between when someone is inquiring out of curiosity and when someone is inquiring from a position of trying to get you to change your mind. There should be no negotiation in relation to prenup agreements or cohabitation agreements. They either sign or the marriage is off. They either sign or the engagement, the relationship is off. Now, it's important to ensure that you have this conversation at a very early stage. Before you start even courting, before you get engaged, before they move into your home, this has to be discussed and it has to be signed. Now, one of the most important parts of the whole process is the importance of seeking legal counsel, legal advice, because in many states and jurisdictions, some of these documents have to be signed through and with the supervision and approval of a family court, so that it can be used in the event of a termination of the relationship. In many ways, it's no different from signing a deed document. You have to ensure that you have the right legal person overseeing the process. Do not rely on producing a document yourself and having both of you sign in each other's company. The documents have to be sent individually to whoever the solicitor is representing each of you, and this has to be two independent solicitors. The solicitors have to make the necessary changes to make sure that such documents are permissible in court. And then when the documents have been modified, the documents have to be explained to both parties together, with both solicitors together. And ideally, you want to ensure that this is recorded. You have a video recording so that sometime in the future, there is no, a discussion about not knowing what one person was doing. Once you've gone through that process, then you can sign. Now recognize that once you've signed the document, it's meant to be a living document. It's not meant to be a dead document. And that simply means over time, as things change in both of your lives, the document should be revisited and updated. If a child is born, the document has to be modified. If for some reason one of you gets really, really ill, loses their jobs, becomes dependent on the other, the document has to be revisited. The point of today's session is not to give you all of the details of what you need. Today's session is simply to draw your attention to the reality that the same way you take out an insurance on a building that you've just bought as a home, recognize the marriage is equally as important as any decision you would ever make. A prenup agreement or a cohabitation agreement is simply an insurance policy. And here is the reason. In the UK, we know that 50% of marriages end in divorce. That 50% applies to the aggregate across all age groups. That includes people who are, say, 50 years, 45 years and above, and who've been married for a long time, who come from a different generation, the baby boomers, and the generation before the baby boomers. They had a different mindset to we, who are much younger. If you look at the statistics for people who are within the age group of 40 and below, that number goes up from 50 and approaches 60. If you look at the divorce rate of people who get married very young, from 20 to about 35, that number increases even further, which is the reason why the average marriage in the UK today has the average duration of roughly about 7 years. Now this simply means that the likelihood of failure in your relationship is very high. So do not be naive. Recognize that if there's a possibility of failure, it's only prudent on your part to ensure that you protect yourself. Now, the feedback that I often get, or the response I often get from young boys or young men when I explain this to them, is that I have nothing. That is usually the response. Well, there's nothing she has here to take. I have nothing. I've just started my career. I'm still young. I don't even own a house. And that is a mistake. If you follow the advice I've provided, which generally means you do not get married before 35, that would imply that by the time you get to 35, you have already acquired some assets. It wouldn't be inconceivable if you're frugal and if you're financially responsible, it wouldn't be inconceivable for you to own 3 or 4 properties at age 35 or at age 40. Those properties, if they are rental properties, will be generating some level of cash flow. But the key thing would be the amortization process that takes place because someone else is paying down your debt. So let's fast forward. Let's say you've taken out a mortgage for, say, 4, let's call it 5 properties. And at the time, each was purchased for £200,000. So you have a portfolio of assets that of the total purchase value of £1 million. 5 multiplied by £200,000, that's £1 million. If you take it out a 15-year mortgage and you've done your calculations intelligently, and at the end of the 15th year, the mortgage would have been paid down by your tenants. That would mean in 15 years, you would have £1 million of assets. Or rather, the value of your assets will be £1 million based on what you originally paid. But we know that properties appreciate over time, and usually properties are indexed to expected inflation. If we just pretend that that property portfolio only grew at roughly 2 or 3% annually, what you would find is that 2% compounded over 15 years could imply that that £1 million portfolio could be something closer, much closer, because if you think about something we call the rule of 72 or the rule of 70, you take 70, you divide it by the interest rate, which in this case we're saying 3%. 70 divided by 3 will give you something in the region of roughly about, say, 7 divided by 3, 24 years. Now, if for some reason property prices had appreciated at a rate slightly above 3%, in this case, why don't we say 6%? That would mean that if you divide 70 by 6, you double your money in 12 years, which could mean that that property portfolio could be worth about £2 million in 15 years at the end of your mortgage duration period. So you have a portfolio worth £2 million. At 35, you get married. Your marriage lasts 7 years. That takes you to 42 years. But what if you initially took out the mortgage at roughly age 28? 15 years on age 28 takes you to roughly 42, which means at the point when you will be getting a divorce, assuming you bought all the properties in the same year, you have a portfolio worth £2 million. If you didn't sign a prenup, based on how the legal system is set up today, your ex-wife will be entitled to half that wealth. And remember, that wealth was created before she came into the union. Now, this is why I keep saying you have to think strategically. If you wait until 35, recognize that you're building wealth and that wealth is compounding. In any case, let's just say you at 35 have nothing. You have to remember that your human capital compounds. Usually you start very slowly, but as you develop more skills and more experience, your earning ability increases. As your earning ability increases, your wealth and your ability to capitalize on that human capital increases. So the prenup protects you for what you've created in the past. It protects you for what you have during the relationship. But here is the most important part. It protects you beyond the relationship and the union when it terminates. Because in today's liberal courts and the judicial system, which is very, very harsh on men, there's an expectation that you should continue to fund her lifestyle, sometimes in perpetuity, which is why they take half of what you've created or what you have. So it's important to recognize that as a man, whenever you're making an important decision, you have to think about how you protect yourself. A cohabitation agreement protects you, and a prenup protects you. Now, let me conclude with this by saying this. I don't know who you are. Sometimes we have families that we come from, and our loved ones have worked all of their lives and left us something of value. It could be a portfolio of properties, it could be stocks, bonds, it could be real estate in terms of land, it could be money in a bank account, something that you will inherit. Having an agreement in advance, signed in advance of the person moving into your life and into your home, or in advance of you moving into their home, and in advance of the announcement of your engagement, not the marriage, but the engagement, ensures that not just your wealth, but your family wealth is protected. My observation has been that people we meet who seem to be the most loving, most friendly, most supportive, at the early stage of the relationship, turn out to be the most bitter, most wicked at the end of the relationship. So do not trust that the same person that you're in love with will be the same person when the love dwindles. Ensure you protect yourself. And let me conclude by saying this, that everything I've shared so far today applies equally to women. Today, we have more women in colleges than men. As a matter of fact, in most of the developed West, 60% of the college graduates are women. Women are joining the workforce today at a rate that far exceeds men. Women are killing. They're doing it. They're doing really well. And what that means is that if you are a woman, everything you've heard thus far should be something that you think about in your best interest. This simply means today women are out working, out earning their partners. Therefore, if the man suggests a prenup, recognize that the prenup protects both of you. It doesn't protect just the man. Gone are the days when prenup was used for very wealthy people, very wealthy men who were marrying younger women and wanted to protect their wealth. Today, men and women have the same opportunities to create wealth. Women are doing exceptionally well. The prenup protects both of you. And as a matter of fact, in conclusion, you do not need a contract to be in love. And if you, the woman, are happy to sign a marriage contract, then likewise you should be equally happy to sign a prenuptial, a cohabitation contract. Both of you should test each other by asking if there will be any objections to signing. Anyone who objects, any party who objects, in my opinion, is not coming into that union for the right reasons. Because, and here is the point, if it's for love, then you shouldn't have an issue signing a prenup or a cohabitation agreement. Now, there's a condition that should be stated, and I'm going to state this from my perspective. If I were married to a lady, there will be a promise that comes with her signing the prenup, and that is simple. If you sign this, then you will be looked after for the duration of our union, and you'll be looked after well. As a matter of fact, most women know that it doesn't matter what they do by signing, they will be looked after. likewise, a man should be willing to sign, recognizing that if for some reason he is dependent on his wife, in the event of the union coming to an end, he will be looked after during the union. Beyond the union, he is on his own 2 feet, and likewise, she is on her own 2 feet. There should be no expectations that he will maintain the lifestyle she created for him, or that she will maintain the lifestyle that he created for her, or that they will maintain the joint lifestyle that they celebrated and lived and had during the union. Now, I hope this has been useful. I think I'm going to do a follow-up session where I try to expand on this or present it in a different way. But keep in mind, begin with the end in mind. Most people think I will be the exception to the rule. I've always been of the view, and this has helped me so much in life, to see myself as the rule, not the exception. And that means if I begin with the end in mind, I say to myself, my marriage is going to end in a divorce. And that will happen. And then I walk backwards to say, well, how can I ensure that it doesn't happen? But first, I need insurance. Set the insurance aside, sign the documents, and then begin with the end in mind and start to look for ways to ensure that you can identify in writing ways to ensure the marriage fails. And then do what I always say, which is simply apply the process of inversion. Invert those items you've identified as causes. And if you invert those causes, that should minimize the likelihood of divorce, or should minimize the likelihood that the union would fail. But in any event, should the union fail, you need to be protected. As I always say, I love you, but sign right there.